It's not every day that you see Darth Vader and Ronald McDonald get thrown in the back of a cop car. But today we're returning to the stupid side of the criminal underworld, checking out hide-and-seek amateurs, the car thief's diary, and more of the dumbest criminals who got away with it, then didn't. Everybody knows that one of the key parts of a bank robbery is preparing a getaway car so you can drive off into the sunset before the cops arrive. But one criminal clearly didn't get the memo. In September 2014, Michael Whittington burgled a TCF bank in Denver, Colorado, and it started off pretty well. Michael walked in, told the employees this is a robbery, and walked back out with a bag full of cash. But then, instead of hopping in an untraceable car, he decided to make his escape by boarding an RTD light train heading north. Now, the thing with trains is that they run on very predictable routes. So, after the cops checked security cameras in the area and watched Whittington leave the bank and board public transport, they knew exactly where he was going to end up. The police followed the train's route, and when it stopped at Welton Street, they were able to board it and bring Whittington in. Afterwards, they discovered he was already wanted on a felony warrant, so they charged him with his original crime and the bank robbery and threw him in jail with a $5,000 bail. Surprisingly, Michael didn't seem that upset by the ordeal, as he later went viral for having the happiest mugshot ever. Still, the friendly neighborhood bank robber was facing some serious prison time, and if you ever want to evade the cops, I wouldn't recommend using a vehicle that runs on rails. Still, surprisingly, a train isn't the dumbest place that a criminal is hidden. In June 2017, the police in Halifax, England caught a case of the giggles while chasing down a criminal who'd robbed over $6,000 from a fish and chip shop. It doesn't get more British than that. All evidence led to a man called Jan Sivak, who was arrested and let out on bail with the condition that he would attend his trial at Bradford Magistrates Court on June 27th. But the 27th came and went, and he never showed up. The police went to Jan's home to take him to trial, and when they went inside, they were shocked to find the criminal hiding under his bed with his legs clearly on display. The cops found it hilarious, so they named and shamed Sivak on their Facebook page, stating he'll not be winning any awards for hide-and-seek champion soon. He was dragged to jail and put on trial, where he received 250 hours of community service and a suspended sentence, which means he'd go straight to jail if he committed another offense within the next 12 months. Sivak had the officers in fits of laughter, but he isn't the only criminal who's been caught clowning around. In February 2025, the police in Palm Bay, Miami were notified of a disturbance outside the Interchange Plaza's shopping center, where a man was cursing and screaming while dressed up as Ronald McDonald. They arrived and identified Ronald as Christopher Marlowe, a man who'd been arrested for trespassing at the mall before and was locally known as Wicked Jesus. Although Chris was dressed like a fun-loving clown, he'd replaced the famous golden arches with a skull, and he wasn't loving it when the cops apprehended him in front of the mall. He fought against the officers as they cuffed him, and when they patted the clown down, they found several similar outfits and red noses in his backpack, as well as a toy gun inside his pocket. Nobody's gonna hire him for their child's birthday party anytime soon. As they placed Marlowe into the police car, a cop told him directly,
"You look like a clown."
And Marlowe bitterly replied,
"No, I am a clown, stupid."
I guess you can't argue with that logic. In any case, he was arrested for trespassing and resisting an officer with assault. Marlowe had caused disturbances at the Interchange Plaza before, and a year earlier, in January 2024, he was jailed for 65 days for possessing illicit substances and causing mischief outside of McDonald's. It isn't clear if Christopher's choice of costume was a protest against Mickey D's due to his previous crime, but after the second incident in 2025, the cops booked him at Brevard County Jail on a $5,000 bond. It looks like Christopher's clowning days are over, but not every clown wears the outfit, and back in 2024, the cops in Blue Earth County, Minnesota caught a criminal who definitely knew how to act the fool. You see, on August 12th, Vanessa Guerra stole a $2,000 Ford Freestar van and immediately sold it to an auto salvage company for scrap. It looked like she'd gotten away with it, but like all the literary greats, Guerra kept a diary of all her comings and goings, and this proved to be her downfall. After her hard day of thieving, she headed home and wrote in her journal, "Totally stole a car today. Super freaking out about it." She was right to be anxious because the owner of the Ford had reported his car missing, and the cops' investigation led them to the auto salvage company, who immediately pointed to Guerra. Soon enough, the cops came a-calling, and when they arrested Guerra and searched her home, they found her precious diary, read her confession, and she was arrested for the theft. This alone comes with a maximum sentence of 5 years in prison, but to make matters worse, she'd stolen the Ford whilst on probation for a previous conviction of theft and driving with a suspended license.
Are you crazy? Or just plain stupid?
Jacking a car while on probation is pretty dumb, and writing about it in your diary is even dumber. But at least Guerra was being honest. The same can't be said for our next perp, Jathan Gilder, who lied his way straight into a prison cell. In February 2025, this criminal put his acting skills to the test by posing as an assistant of an NBA player at a Tiffany store in Orlando, Florida. He brazenly told the assistants he was there to buy some bling for an Orlando Magic athlete, and surprisingly, the con was convincing. The store clerk presented him with a $587,000 diamond ring and 2 sets of diamond earrings worth a combined $780,000. Then, without warning, Gilder suddenly grabbed the jewelry and rushed away, grappling with an employee to get out of the store. The ring was knocked from his hand, but Gilder got away with the earrings, ran to his Mitsubishi, and set off towards his home state of Texas. Fortunately, the cops were able to use security cameras and Gilder's license plate to track his car to Washington County, where he was stopped by the highway police 6 hours after the robbery. As the cops approached, they noticed Gilder swallowing something, and when they searched the car, the earrings were nowhere in sight. Still, they hauled him to the Washington County Jail, and when he refused to explain where he dumped the stolen loot, they decided to give Jathan an X-ray scan. This revealed that Gilder had swallowed the giant earrings when he was stopped, and when the cops confronted him, the criminal genuinely asked, "Am I going to be charged with what's in my stomach?" As if swallowing a stolen item was a legal loophole that made it yours. Ultimately, he was taken to hospital for 12 days as all 4 earrings were recovered from his stomach. Then Gilder was charged with theft and held in an Orange County jail, where the cops soon discovered that he'd had 48 outstanding arrest warrants in Colorado alone and a previous arrest in 2022 for stealing from a Tiffany store in Texas. He must have had too much heat in those states, which is why he traveled all the way to Florida for his next heist. But Jathan's ploy was ultimately pointless, as he ended up swallowing his prize loot anyway. Talk about breakfast at Tiffany's. Whilst Gilder attempted a great escape across America, some criminals aren't so motivated. In fact, William Wilcox from Milford, Michigan accidentally headed towards the cops and delivered himself to a police station while he was distracted by his phone. Like many of us, Wilcox is a fan of playing games, and in 2016, no game was hotter than Pokemon Go. It lets you use your phone's camera to catch Pokemon in the real world and visit gyms to battle other players. But all Wilcox caught from the game was a criminal case and a battle with the law. You see, he was wanted for failing to show up in court for a breaking and entering charge, but instead of laying low, he set out into Milford to play Pokemon Go, and it just so happened that Milford Police Station was designated as a gym in the game. So Wilcox walked straight up to the station in his pajamas and loitered outside while playing on his phone. He was so captivated by catching Pokemon that he didn't notice when the cops came outside and recognized his face, allowing them to saunter up and arrest him on the spot. He was eventually released from custody on the condition that he would return to court, but the police said he was more upset about being unable to continue the game than he was about his own arrest. What a Bulbasaur loser. Wilcox was dedicated to catch them all, but ultimately, he was the one who got caught. Still, he isn't the only criminal who's led the cops straight to him. In 2003, a 22-year-old called Albert Dowdy decided to break into a house in Grants Pass, Oregon, and he first attempted to get into the property by throwing a can of paint through a window. The can bounced off the glass and spilled white paint all over the ground. But Dowdy didn't quit, and he eventually managed to get inside the house another way. Now, if I was a burglar, I'd probably focus on stealing expensive items like jewelry and electronics, but Dowdy was a hungry boy, and all he stole was a single can of tuna and a box of oatmeal before leaving the premises. Unfortunately for him, he was so excited about his food that he didn't watch where he was going, and he walked straight through the paint that he'd spilled outside. So when the cops were notified of the burglary and arrived on the scene, they found a trail of white footsteps outside the house that led straight to the nearby Hawks Inn Motel. They found Dowdy in a room with his paint-covered shoes and stolen dinner, allowing them to arrest him for burglary and criminal mischief. He was ultimately held in jail after being unable to pay $65,000 in bail, which seems a little harsh for stealing food worth less than $10. But if Dowdy had cleaned up the mess he made, he might have never been caught, and I bet he wished he'd gotten his snacks from Target instead. In Albert's dinner,
the secret ingredient is crime.
But he isn't the only criminal whose stomach got them into legal trouble. If you're of legal drinking age, you've probably experienced a night out that didn't end quite as you expected. Whether it's falling into some bushes or passing out on a stranger's couch, lots of us have had our fair share of dumb drunk moments. But 28-year-old Ricardo Cardona might have had the worst hangover anxiety ever recorded after he woke up to a room full of cops after a night of partying in 2014. Cardona was drinking in Austin, Texas when he got hungry and decided to break into a butcher's called Hudson Meat Market at around 5:30 a.m. He tried to break through the store's door for 20 minutes before finally getting inside, stealing some raw sausages, and leaving again. Now, it isn't clear if he felt guilty for the crime or he just got sleepy, but soon after, Ricardo returned to the store, went into its office, and took a nap in a chair. He didn't even get to eat his stolen food because he slept like a baby until 7 a.m. when he found himself being woken up by some disappointed police officers. They arrested him for criminal trespass, but because nothing was actually stolen, Hudson Meat Market wrote it off as a drunken mishap and didn't press charges. That's lucky because I can't imagine anything more embarrassing than going to jail and explaining to the other prisoners that you got busted for stealing sausages. Hopefully Cardona learns his lesson and grows up a bit, but some people definitely don't get wiser with age, like the 40-year-old bank robber Thomas Infante. In 2008, Infante robbed a Fifth Third Bank in Chicago by walking straight in and handing the teller a note. On it, he demanded, "Be quick and be quit. Give your cash or I'll shoot." Despite the misspelling of quiet, the teller got the message and discreetly gave Infante around $397 before he fled the building. It was an easy cash grab for the criminal, but it turned out to be an even easier investigation for the detectives, as Infante's note immediately gave away his identity. See, Thomas had written the demand on the back of a torn pay stub from his day job. He'd ripped the stub and left the other half on the floor outside the bank, and when the police found it, they discovered Infante's full name, address, and workplace. Thomas was then promptly arrested at his home in Cary, Illinois, sentenced to 46 months in prison, and ordered to pay back the cash he stole. Infante clearly hadn't thought his heist through, but in 2024, 4 guys from California cooked up an incredibly elaborate plan to steal some dough through insurance fraud. The idea, which probably sounded genius over one too many beers, involved staging fake bear attacks on the interiors of their luxury cars to collect insurance payments. They thought that if they could provide video evidence of bear attacks, the insurers would have to pay them for the damages, allowing them to accumulate a huge amount of cash. So on January 28th, one of them put on a full-body bear costume and used a barbecue tool called a meat claw to leave scratches all over the interiors of their 2 Mercedes models and their Rolls-Royce. They then sent security footage of each attack to 3 different insurance companies as evidence. Incredibly, the companies fell for the ruse, and the group received a total of $141,839 in payouts from the 3 separate claims. The men must have been ecstatic, but they missed an important detail. The exact same date and address was used on all 3 claims, which was eventually flagged as highly suspicious. This prompted the California Department of Insurance to analyze the footage and bring in a bear expert from the Department of Fish and Wildlife. They confirmed that the bear was clearly a human in a costume, so the police subsequently went to the perps' homes and found the suit before arresting the 4 buddies for insurance fraud. The power of friendship, eh? Laughing together, crying together, defrauding together. It just warms your heart. These best buds took the term partners in crime too literally, and our next case is no different, as it involves a duo of delinquents with 1 brain cell between them. You've heard of Dumb and Dumber, right? Well, this is the Texan adaptation starring Dorian Walker Gaines and Dillian Thompson from Houston. Together, they accessed an unlocked truck belonging to a man called Stuart Schaefer and stole $5,000 and an iPad. Then they fled to a nearby Burger King and used the iPad to film some videos that flaunted their newfound wealth.
Hello, America. This is Dorian from the Money Team.
They called themselves the Money Team, and Walker Gaines even posted the video on Facebook. However, what they failed to realize was that everything they recorded was also being uploaded onto Stuart Schaefer's iCloud account and appearing on all his other devices. Sure enough, Schaefer soon discovered the footage and forwarded it to the police. He also had a friend upload images of the Money Team to Reddit, and when they went viral, somebody contacted Schaefer and gave him Dorian and Dillian's names and addresses. Schaefer gave this info to the police, who brought the criminals in and sentenced them to 5 years of community supervision. Dorian's sentencing also included a restitution order that required him to pay Schaefer back $9,000 to cover the stolen money and tablet. Man, they could have just bought an iPad for that money. Hopefully, Schaefer learned to stop leaving stuff in his truck, and usually keeping your valuables on your person is the best way to keep them safe. However, this became the undoing of a 19-year-old burglar from Houston in May 2017. Sirocco Balmaceda and 2 accomplices attempted to rob a house in Harris County by breaking into the garage. But when they got inside, they were confronted by the homeowner, who surprised them by pulling out a gun. The thieves noped out of there and escaped, and the whole thing could have ended there. Except when the homeowner looked around his garage, he found that Balmaceda had dropped his backpack and left it at the scene. It contained his school ID and documentation that showed he was already on probation for stealing a vehicle. So the homeowner sent photos of the evidence to the police, who quickly identified and arrested Balmaceda. But the bag hadn't just implicated him in this crime, and it was also connected to another burglary on the same street that was committed back in October 2016. A burglar broke into a property and stole a $950 light, but a neighborhood house had captured security footage of the thief. The footage didn't clearly show the crook's face, so he got away scot-free. However, it did show a distinctive backpack that was linked to Balmaceda after the second burglary a whole year later. This meant that Sirocco was charged with 2 counts of burglary, and incredibly, a deputy managed to track the light he stole in 2016 to a nearby pawn shop and get it back to the victim. Sirocco's accomplices weren't identified, so the Texan was ultimately the lone star of his crimes, as he was sent to jail and forced to learn a very humbling lesson. Don't bring your ID to the crime scene, dummy. This next criminal also stood to learn a lesson, specifically in driver's ed. I'll admit I'm not the best driver in the world, and I've definitely taken some wrong turns in my life, but back in 2015, Sylvia Machia, Mr. Exit, ended up with a criminal record. See, Machia had gone to Mexico to acquire a large amount of illicit substances, if you catch my drift. Incredibly, she successfully made it through the U.S.-Mexico border at the Otay Mesa port of entry, which divides San Diego and Tijuana. The border agents who inspected her Ford Focus had no idea she was concealing 27 pounds of the good stuff behind the car's rear quarter panels. So Sylvia was waved through, and she'd completely gotten away with her crime. But then she took the worst wrong turn of her life. Instead of driving onwards and into San Diego, she accidentally drove into a secondary parking lot, which was reserved for suspicious cars that agents had singled out for further inspection. As soon as she entered the lot, the agents there assumed her car had been marked as suspect, so they didn't let her leave and demanded to inspect it again more thoroughly. This time, the contraband was discovered, and it turned out to have a street value of over $100,000. Sylvia later pled guilty to a substance importation charge and was sentenced to 75 months in a Californian prison. As part of her probation, Machia can never re-enter Mexico, but I think that was unnecessary. She's so bad at following directions, she probably wouldn't be able to find the country again anyway. Machia made a split decision that cost her freedom, but other more twisted criminals are far more calculated. Dennis Rader began a horrifying spree in 1974 and went on to take the lives of 10 people over 17 years. Nobody knew who he was, and he was simply referred to as BTK by the media, until he exposed his own identity with a simple IT error. Based in Wichita, Kansas, Rader was one of the most infamous active criminals in America until 1991, when he practically vanished into thin air. The crime stopped and all of the police's leads dried up, so it looked like BTK's horrific crimes would go unsolved. In 2004, a report in the Wichita Eagle speculated that BTK must have passed away due to his inactivity. But Rader read this, and due to boredom and an overinflated ego, he decided to send an anonymous letter to the paper to prove he was still alive. Homicide detective Ken Landwehr decided to lure Rader out of hiding by exchanging coded messages in newspaper ads to get his attention. The ploy worked, and in early 2005, Rader left a note for the cops at a Home Depot in Wichita, Kansas, asking if it would be safe for him to communicate with them directly via a floppy disk. It isn't clear why he would trust the people trying to put him in prison, but the cops placed an ad in a newspaper with the words, "It will be okay," and 2 weeks later a floppy disk arrived. It contained a file with the words, "This is a test," and as far as Rader was concerned, it was totally untraceable. But when the cops opened up the file's properties, it showed that the document had been created on a public computer in a local Wichita church and was last saved by a user called Dennis. From here, the investigators tried to find out whether any of the church's attendees had that name, and in a sickening twist, they discovered that the president of the congregation was none other than Dennis Rader. Finally, the decades-long game of cat and mouse was over, and Rader was promptly arrested and sentenced to 10 life terms for his 10 victims, racking up 175 years in prison. Incredibly, Dennis felt like he'd been betrayed, and he couldn't believe that the cops had lied to him and said the floppy disk would be anonymous. Sorry, BTK, I don't think you get to take the moral high ground here. Rader is still serving at El Dorado Correctional Facility in Kansas today, and he was only caught due to his ego and the police's clever floppy disk trick. But he wasn't the only perp who's gotten criminally overconfident, and a petty thief called Sam Lake also got himself arrested by communicating with the police. In 2014, Lake was sentenced to 7 months of house arrest for burglary and theft in Christchurch, New Zealand. But Sam got cabin fever, and in October he cut his electronic bracelet off and went on the run. Christchurch PD started their search by putting up a wanted post on Facebook, and incredibly, an hour later Sam commented on it himself. He told the cops that he needed a new mugshot before photoshopping Ben Stiller's face from the movie Zoolander over the photo and making it his profile picture.
What is this?
The police knew they were dealing with a joker, so they fired back by commenting, "Come and see us and we'll arrange at no cost." Lake wasn't fooled by their offer, but he did pop up with another taunt. At this point, they were arguing online like middle schoolers. But unfortunately for Lake, his taunts gave the cops a huge amount of motivation as they doubled down on the search and managed to find him just 1 day later. He was discovered and arrested 270 miles away in the city of Wellington and given a 6-month prison sentence for his original burglary and going on the run. Sam finally got his wish for a new mugshot, and using social media to taunt the cops is a pretty modern method of going on the run. But some crooks still like to evade the law the good old-fashioned way, with a mask. Everybody knows that Darth Vader is a pretty bad guy, from blowing up planets to neglecting his son and robbing convenience stores. Wait, what? Yep, in 2015, the Sith Lord himself walked into a convenience store in Jacksonville, Florida, and ordered the cashier to hand over some money. His lightsaber was probably in the shop because his weapon of choice was a handgun, which he pointed at the clerk, but unlike the fictional villain, he didn't use any force, and it was ultimately the employee that struck back. They grabbed a bottle of ranch dressing and threw it at the robber's head, causing him to flee the store with a nasty bruise and drive off into the night. Fortunately, the cops were able to track the Sith Lord down thanks to a witness who'd seen him outside the shop before the attempted robbery. The robber had stupidly waited until he entered the store to put his mask on, and his ginger beard, septum piercing, and buzz cut allowed the cops to identify him as a 32-year-old called Jacob Mercer. So Darth Vader wasn't able to evade the law, as the cops soon found Jacob 3 blocks away from the store at a friend's house, and he was arrested for armed robbery. If you're a criminal, dressing up as one of the most famous villains in pop culture is a bit on the nose, but other delinquents disguise themselves in holier outfits. In 2013, 3 nuns flew from mainland Colombia to the Caribbean island of San Andres, claiming they were on some kind of holy mission. But when they arrived at the airport, security didn't think their outfits looked like the real deal, as they were made of cheap fabrics. So they body searched them and found a large quantity of a very sinful substance strapped to their legs. None of the nuns were the real deal, and they were really smugglers who tried to bring 4 pounds of nose candy onto the island, concealed underneath their robes. With an estimated street value of $35,000, the trio were soon arrested and jailed on charges of trafficking, left to pray for forgiveness in a prison cell. Maybe if they'd invested in some better costumes, they could have gotten away. But the naughty nuns had cheaped out on their unholy mission and served the consequences. Let's just hope they don't make crime a habit. The smuggling nuns might have suffered from a poor choice of outfit, but it beats this next costume that was complete garbage. In 2009, the environmental activist group Greenpeace took to the streets of Moscow, Russia, and campaigned against the proposed construction of a waste incineration plant in the city of Zelenograd. Amongst them was Das Vidanya, an activist who took part in the protest while dressed up as a recycling container. He turned up outside a presidential administration office with 100,000 signatures on a petition that demanded to halt the burning of waste in favor of recycling instead. But unfortunately, protesting on issues like this and opposing the Russian government is a big no-no, and police were soon deployed with strict orders to take out the trash. During one of the protests, Das was dragged off the streets and into the back of a bus, and getting away from the cops proved impossible in his get-up. Although he wasn't really a criminal and his intentions were honorable, his statement-making choice of outfit wasn't a good choice for opposing Russia's merciless government. So when it came to escaping, Doss's outfit was trash. But one crook from Glades County, Florida took this felon fashion show even further by attempting to trick the cops with a wig and a pretty dress. On April 24, 2024, police located a stolen boat near the old Calusa Lodge in Lakeport, Florida. After narrowing down their suspects, they wanted to question a local man called Joshua Kalatka, who was already wanted for similar crimes. They started searching high and low for Josh, and as they canvassed his neighborhood and went door to door, they saw a woman leaving a house with blonde hair, sunglasses, and a blue summer dress. They approached the woman to ask her if she'd seen Joshua, and as they got up close to the blonde bombshell, they realized they'd found him. He was immediately arrested for stealing the boat, and other stolen goods were found inside the property, including a John Deere Gator vehicle. It isn't clear whether he wanted to sail far away and start a new life as a farmer, but he was ultimately hauled to Glades County Jail pending a transfer to Okeechobee County, where he had 2 more outstanding warrants. So he wasn't able to ride the boat or Gator to freedom, and his diva disguise didn't work. But in my opinion, he looks great, and I think he could have a career as a drag queen when he gets out of the slammer. Please welcome to the stage, Misdemeanor. Which one of these smugglers, thieves, and con men did you think was the dumbest? Let me know in the comments below, and thanks for watching.